Hello, everybody, and welcome into Speaking Steagles, the premier Pennsylvania pro football podcast. I'm Nick Vete, joined as always by Ricardo Martinez Paz, and we are here. We've got the draft episode up and ready to go. We're going to be breaking down all things related to the Eagles and the Steelers when it comes to the NFL draft that is starting just tomorrow night. Ricardo, it's finally here, man. The build-up from the time free agency ends all the way to now, it's just thoughts are building towards that mock draft, or towards the draft, I should say, until, you go through the mock drafts, you go through different scenarios, you get minor moves here and there that your team makes, but finally the NFL draft, when rosters are rebuilt, new faces are brought into the organization. It's finally here, man. How you feeling?
Oh, I feel great. It's such a great time of year to be a football fan. I mean, just reading up on all the mock drafts, all the different prospects that are out there, the top tier quarterbacks, all those different position groups. It's just so much fun. It's really for some franchises, or hopefully for most. That player, that impact players that will hopefully contribute a lot in the future and immediately. So it's big for every team, but it's from a fan standpoint, it's just so much fun.
So much of the fun of the draft too is it's nobody knows whether these guys are really going to be studs or if they're going to be busts or anything like that. But it's the fact of your team, what they lost, what they gained in the offseason so far through free agency. You know what your roster is returning from the season prior, but it's like all of a sudden you're going to get 5 to 10, depending on how many draft picks you have, new faces into your organization that you're going to get to watch in just a couple weeks, go through training camp and eventually compete for your football team out there. So much fun to just see new players join these teams. And we're going to be talking about it for the Steelers and Eagles today. And there's some other news that we'll get into towards the end of this episode. Both of these teams have been, keeping things busy in the offseason leading up to the draft. But we are going to start today just talking a little bit about the draft strategy of these two teams. Obviously, when it comes to the first round, which is more or less what we're going to be breaking down today primarily, we'll talk a little bit about the mid rounds too, or maybe any sleepers we have for deep in there. But we're going to keep things pretty eyed up on the first round because that's what's coming here tomorrow. And we're going to talk about the strategy. The Steelers picking at 17th, and also I guess we could talk about 32 because it's right there, their first pick overall in the second round. And then for the Eagles, drafting at 10 and 30. So, I know you're chomping at the bit to talk because you've got some clear expectations for what the Eagles are going to do here. So just walk us through a little bit for the Eagles, what you think their strategy is going to be.
So I'll start off with the fun fact for you. For Howie Roseman, the Eagles GM, in 3 out of the last 4 drafts, he is either traded up or down, and for a total of 5 times. The only time he didn't was when they drafted Jalen Reagor, and we all know how that worked out. But in those drafts, I believe it was Andre Dillard back in 2019. Then it was traded with the Dolphins from 6 to 12, and then back up to 10 for Devontae Smith. And then last year, moved up from 13 to 15 to draft Jordan Davis. And then they also traded for A.J. Brown. They gave that to the Titans up. And here's a big thing that we should know. The Eagles have 6 picks, and they don't have any 5th or 6th rounders. After the 4th round, they have nothing, and it's just 2 7th rounders. So,
and ironically, the Steelers are set up the same way. They don't have any 5th or 6th round.
I was going to say they also don't.
They have a 4th round pick and then 2 7s.
Yeah, it's really funny how that worked out. But I mean, I've been saying this for a while. I mean, there's no way that one of these picks that the Eagles have is not going to get moved. It's just Howie Roseman. If he really likes a player and he sees someone on the board, then he's going to go get him. And next year, I mean, this is a bit soon, but we have I believe quite a few more picks than this. Probably, I believe around 10 or something like that. Something crazy compared to this year because of all the free agents. But maybe he uses some of those picks from next year to move up in the draft, something along those lines. But it's just, to me, it's one of these 2 picks, if not both, will be moved. It's just how it always seems to go with Howie Roseman. And if there isn't a player if there's a player he doesn't, or sorry, if there isn't a player he likes, then he'll move down, or something along those lines. And there's always the possibility, there's always these rumors of like Derrick Henry that are, sort of out there. Maybe they use a first rounder again to trade for him, although I think that's unlikely. I don't think that's going to happen, but you really don't know. I mean, I'm just fairly certain that one of these picks will not be that these picks will not be the ones
So
that the Eagles will have.
So
So
we'll get into some scenarios and some players and some situations in a little bit. But let me ask you this. Do you think it's more likely that there's a player that potentially he likes at 10 and moves up for? Or do you see him moving back there? Or maybe do you think it's moving up at 30 or trading back at 30? I mean, do you have any expectations between those two specifically about what way it could go? I mean, what's your gut telling you? Because like you said, 3 of the last 4, he's had success moving a first round pick.
I think he might trade out of the first round and with that 30th pick. Um, it's not that the Eagles don't have any like they obviously have needs, but in terms of value, I think Howie Roseman's one of those GMs where it's like, okay, I'll trade out if I don't think the value's right for a player. Like if a player is projected to go in the second round, he'll probably move back and try and draft that player later on. And so I think 30 is more likely to be moved back than 10. I mean, it's so much chaos at the top end of the drafts. This the top half, the top 5 specifically. You can maybe say even top 6. But I did see something recently where Jalen Carter if he slips past number 5, past Seattle's pick, that the Eagles might trade up for him there. But it's
Well,
answer your question. Yeah, I think the Eagles will trade 30 back for more picks too, which also helps for those later rounds.
yeah, and that's going to kind of lead me into my Steelers topic. And I mean, neither of these teams are looking at Hendon Hooker, whatsoever. Both of them are pretty
Yeah.
set at quarterback right now.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty obvious for everybody. But I think that the aspect that the Eagles are right there at 30, and we talked about this yesterday when we were both on campus together, and the fact that you get that extra 50-year option if you take a quarterback in the first round. With if Hendon Hooker, is still there when it gets to like 28, 29, some of these teams like the Bengals or the Saints that don't need a quarterback, there could be a QB hungry team that's sitting right there in the second round that's saying, hey, like if we jump back into this first, we like what we see in Hendon Hooker. Let's grab him at the end. The Eagles are looking to trade out. We'll give them a couple extra picks and hey, we'll go get our guy. So I kind of agree with you that I think that could be a possible scenario. Now, the reason that it kind of transitions right in the Steelers too is when we talk about their draft strategy, sitting there with the 17th overall pick and then 32, which obviously it's a second round pick, but essentially in any other year it'd be a first round pick because of the fact the Dolphins had their pick forfeited. They're sitting there at 32, and the interesting talk is that Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan had a press conference the other day, and they were pretty forthright in saying like they're willing to trade back from 32. They're not crazy about that spot, and they were
Mhm.
also kind of talking and flirting with the idea saying that they're not afraid to move up from 17. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that they've kind of talked and tipped their hand a little bit. I don't know how much of it could be smoke and mirrors, but like both of those scenarios seem feasible to me. Like the
Yeah.
idea of them moving up, if there's an offensive lineman that they're into, or if there's a player that they're into that's going to be earlier in the draft, I fully can see them moving up from 17 to try and make something happen, and then dropping back from 32 if a team wants to move up and grab a player to reacquire the assets you're going to have to give up in order to move up from 17, if all that kind of makes sense. So,
Mhm.
I mean, when we talk about pick now, again, 32, I mean, it's not as enticing as pick 30 to get a quarterback because you don't have that 50-year option. But I could see the Steelers trying to move out of there. Now, with 17, I fully believe the talk that they could potentially look to move up if the right player is there. They supposedly had talks with the Bears at 9, the Titans at 11, and the one team where I'm like, I feel like it could work for both sides is if the Eagles weren't in love with anybody at the 10th overall pick and we're like, hey, if we move back to 17, there'll be some edge rushers we could like there. There'll be some, there's going to be some interior defensive linemen that they like there. So I feel like it could be a win-win for both teams, and then the Steelers could jump ahead of some other teams that may be looking for offensive line. I mean, I don't know. It seems like a match made in heaven between these two Pennsylvania franchises. What do you make of it?
Um, I mean, logically that makes sense. If there's not a player that Howie Roseman likes, yeah, I mean, I think he would move back. And like you said, it does help both teams, especially with the tackle class sort of. I mean, there might be a run on tackles. You never know. The Bears definitely in need of an offensive lineman. Theirs has been poor for quite a few years. Eagles potentially could be targeting that position as well. So that's my only well, like my big thing. I wouldn't say there's a specific player that the Eagles are targeting at 10, but if it might just come down to best player available, which might be an offensive lineman. We don't know.
Yeah.
But for sure for the Steelers, it would be uh I mean, for both sides, it would definitely be mutually beneficial if
Yeah,
that
and
would
I
happen.
mean, outside of the Bears and the Eagles, who you just rattled off, if you go down the list of teams that are picking after that point, I mean, the Titans could use a tackle. The Texans, if they take a quarterback early, could be looking to protect him and bolster that offensive line, even though it already is. It does have some good pieces there. The Patriots, the Jets could both be looking at offensive line. I mean, the Commanders, even you could say, even though they signed 2 guys in free agency
Yeah.
to play on that offensive line, who knows if the right prospect is there. So, again, I mean, I think unless if there's a prospect that the Steelers love at the tackle position that makes it outside of the top 8, I would not be surprised if they go and get him. Like, this is our guy. Like, we got to protect Kenny Pickett, our quarterback of the future. Like, he's the one that's going to do it. I wouldn't shock me if they go up and get him.
Yeah, and I think they should do it if that is the case. Because yeah, they do need offensive tackles. Their interior is looking better now with Isaac Seumalo, former Eagle, but on the outside, you gotta improve there, and especially with add more depth. I mean, if you're drafting someone a lineman in the first round, there you're expecting them to start, but
Yeah.
still, it's another player there in that position.
100%. So I think we kind of talked about the strategy. What do you want to move on to first? Do we want to go and talk about maybe positions these teams are going to target? Or do we want to talk about maybe like the big board or prospects? I mean, I think if we talk about the positions, but it's going to come out who the guys are that could potentially be there. And then I think after the fact, we can kind of give our big board of the prospects we're discussing. So I think let's go into some of these positions, talk about some of the players that are going to be available potentially, and we'll see where it goes from there. So
Yeah.
you want me to go first? You want to go first? What are kind of like the 3 to 5 positions you see the Eagles really targeting?
Yeah, so I would say offensive lineman, uh, anywhere on the defensive line. Those are the two I feel that Howie Roseman puts a lot of emphasis on building from the trenches. And man, I after that I would because this class isn't very deep in terms of linebackers or safeties.
Yeah,
Corners is
and
corners really deep.
it's not top heavy for safeties or linebackers either. So
Yeah, exactly.
it's like if you're going to target them, it's like, hey, you're going to take a guy in a mid to late round.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say I'm sort of cheating a little bit by saying offensive linemen in general and defensive linemen in general, but those are two that I think the Eagles always put emphasis on, and two positions that they could add depth on. I would be quite honest saying that. So
Yeah.
I would say those positions anywhere across the line, those lines are the targets.
And just real quick, I mean, you're talking both interior defensive line and a guy that more lines up. Obviously, we still don't really know for sure. How the defensive scheme is going to change now that Jonathan Gannon's not there completely. But if
Yeah.
it still is kind of like a base 4-3, then you could be looking at some of these guys that are more like DN type build edge rushers, which obviously the Eagles having guys like Josh Sweat or Hassan Reddick,
Hassan Reddick,
Derek
yeah,
Barnett along those lines. So
yeah.
okay, yeah. And so O line, D line, and then where else do you kind of have your eye on?
See, I want to say running back, but I really don't want them to do this. I don't want them to. I know we all know which prospect I would.
This is going to be a discussion in and of itself a little later on, but
yeah, I won't get into it right now. But running back is certainly one. It's the weakest position on offense. And this team last year was so good offensively. I mean, it was one of the hardest to stop, one of the best in the league. So, I mean, if you think about it in that way, then yeah, running back's certainly a position of need.
So, two other positions that I'm just curious what your thoughts are on, because where the Eagles are situated at 10, it feels like there could be, some of these top, really, I mean, I think, in my opinion, Devin Witherspoon and Christian Gonzalez are the top 2 corners in this class, and both of them could potentially be available there at 10. Now, obviously, the Eagles re-signed. They re-signed Darius
Darius
Slay and
Slay.
James Bradbury. But could it still be? I mean, both those guys are getting up there in age, and corner is one of the premier positions on defense. Is that a position you think they could still target there, or no?
I think it is, especially when you take into account even their slot corner, Avonte Maddox, who hasn't been healthy like for a full season in I don't know. I don't think he has been in his career. So there's the injury concern there, and if you so that immediately could pique the interest of Howie Roseman. So it's certainly one that I wouldn't be surprised if they went for one of those two prospects. But I would say the first three I mentioned are probably bigger priorities. Corner, to me, it's also like, yeah, I know that like you re-sign these players and all, and it's like, well, why are we drafting someone? And they also signed like Greedy Williams, is probably going to be more of a special teamer, former first rounder, I believe, second rounder. So you already have a pretty crowded corner room at the moment, but I mean, if it's best player available and it's a corner, then I wouldn't be shocked if they took one of them too.
Okay, fair enough. So I'll talk about some of these Steelers positions that I could see them targeting, and then we'll get into some of these scenarios and specific prospects and situations we could see unfold. So for the Steelers, I alluded to this already. I think the clear-cut biggest need, biggest positional target they are going to go for is going to be that offensive tackle. Not really addressing it in free agency. They addressed the interior offensive line in free agency, but protecting Kenny Pickett is the number one thing this Steelers team has to focus on in this draft. And I think that starts first and foremost with getting one of these top four offensive tackles who could potentially be on the board for them. So I think that is definitely priority number one. Then it's interesting because then you could get into the talk of, well, they have, the TJ Watt and they have TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith at the outside linebacker positions. They have some guys on the interior defensive line. They re-signed Larry Ogunjobi, so maybe they're good there. But corner, yeah, they brought in Patrick Peterson, but losing Cam Sutton really hurt, and you don't really have anything there for the future. So I feel like a big talk could be, well, maybe that's the next position of emphasis. But to me, it's like I think the bigger need is really addressing that defensive line or those outside linebackers. Because in my opinion, if you can add somebody to that defensive line who plays more of kind of that stand-up D tackle, can play as kind of like anywhere from a 1 to 3 tech on the defensive line, that's where I think that the Steelers can really take the next jump. You get that guy that adds depth, but also can kind of supplant Montravius Adams eventually. And you've also got DeMarvin Leal, who is going to probably take on a bigger role this year. That interior defensive line can really become legit. And then I also think on the outside at edge rusher, the best teams, look at the Eagles, for example. The guys coming off the edge, Josh Sweat, Derek Barnett, Hassan Reddick, like Brandon Graham. Like you have multiple guys. It's not just your top two guys that are going on either side and rushing the passer. So if the Steelers can add a third guy who can be a legit third rotational outside linebacker rushing the passer, I think that would be huge. So for me, and just knowing what the Steelers try to do, my big board, my position board to target kind of shakes out as offensive tackle, defense, interior defensive line, edge rusher, outside linebacker, then corner, and then you get into the safeties or the inside linebackers, which the Steelers also kind of need. But again, not quite as big a priority given just the way that this draft class is going to shake out here.
I think that's interesting that you don't have corner as the second, like, most important position that the Steelers should target because, like you just said, they lost Cam Sutton. Patrick Peterson isn't getting any younger. So why wouldn't they prioritize that, especially if there's, I mean, who knows? Maybe it's a pretty deep class. Why wouldn't they target that over, say, the interior defensive line?
Well, yeah, I think that's a big part of it is because I think it's just the way that the class does work out is that you can find corners, whether it's at that later second round pick the Steelers have, or if it's somewhere in the third. I mean, there's guys I like who are going to go later in this draft. Kelee Ringo, I believe is how you say his name, out of Georgia. I like him a lot. He's a hard hitter, gets after it in the run game too, as well as being obviously a speedy corner and man-to-man. He's going to go somewhere in the second round potentially. Tyreek Stevenson, out of Miami. He's a guy that's going to go somewhere in the second round potentially. Julius Brents, I could see going as late as the third round out of Kansas State, who's got all the measurables you want in a corner. I mean, even guys like Darius Rush or Cam Smith out of I believe they're out of South Carolina, I want to say, but I don't remember for sure. But these are guys that are going to go later in the draft that I'm like, hey, I'd be comfortable if we wait on corner, especially because the Steelers, frankly, when you look at their history, they don't draft corners early. Like their last corner they drafted in the first round was already burned. That did not work out well. The last corner, I can't even name the last corner prior to that. I know it was a while ago, but I don't have it off the top of my head. Like they just don't draft corners early and do it well. So if they want to wait until the second or third round, it's still a priority. I think all four of those positions, if they're drafting one of those four positions, I'm going to be happy with it because they're addressing a major need. Yeah. But to me, the priority first is offensive tackle, and then really I think adding on the defensive line and on the edge. It comes before corner, but if I'm tiering it, tier 1 of importance is the tackle, and then the other 3 positions are in tier 3 of importance.
Got it. Okay.
You get that tackle with your first pick, and then you see how the board unfolds the rest of the draft.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
So that's just where my mindset is right now. But that being said, I think we can kind of talk about some of these situations and prospects, which is what we're, I guess, really gunning for here. So let's talk about the Eagles at 10 first and foremost, and just talk about maybe some guys that'll be available, what you kind of want them to do, who you really like at the position. So, I'll let you kind of take it away. What are kind of like the 2 or 3 prospects you really want to see him go after here?
Yeah. So I'll tell you one I don't want them to go for. And it's Bijan Robinson, running back from Texas. I think it's a passing league. The league is just very much, you can find running backs in later rounds. It's a fairly decent class in terms of backs. So I don't think it's a necessity that they go out and get Bijan. Yeah, he might be like the best prospects in Saquon, but still you have other needs. And it's something that, Howie Roseman doesn't draft running backs in the first round. That's just something I can't even tell you the last time we did that. I think it was in the 2000s at some point. So that shows you how little, I guess, the organization values the position. And so I guess.
Well, no, let me ask you, because now we got to have this Bijan Robinson conversation a little bit. So I get the mindset. It's an interesting point you bring up that you can't even remember the last time they drafted a running back in the first round. That's perfectly fair. But again, it's the fact of like with what they have going now, with Jalen Hurts as the quarterback and how prevalent the RPO was in their offense last year. If this guy really is the best running back prospect since Saquon Barkley, like the Eagles don't, I know they have other needs, but like if you can take this pick here and potentially trade your later pick to acquire a whole bunch of other capital to make moves at different positions, like does that idea of bringing in Bijan Robinson not entice you at all? And defense is having to deal with, oh shit, here we go again with Jalen Hurts faking the handoff to Bijan Robinson. Oh wait, it's an RPO and he actually gave it to him. Like, to me, the idea of having to stop that is just a whole nother level than what they have right now with Rashad Penny and Kenny Gainwell.
Right. I just, to counter that, I would say that this offense is built more like, the RPO is a huge part of it, but I think it's, at least from a lot of things I've read within like Bleeding Green Nation, the Eagles, SB Nation stuff, it's this offense passes first to open up the run later on. So, that's why you saw very often in the first half, the second quarter, they had the highest like margin. Like they've always put up at least a touchdown per quarter, per second quarter in every game. And then it opens up the run game for the second half to, try and bleed the clock and all that. Obviously, it's not necessarily sustainable, but it's still, relying on Jalen Hurts. So there's a reason. I know we're going to get to this. There's a reason you gave him all this money. His passing has developed tremendously. So it's like just going back to what I said. It's it would be nice. I don't hate him at all. I don't hate Bijan Robinson at all. I think he's great. Yeah. I just don't think this is a priority for the Eagles, and it shouldn't be, because this. Talk about durability too. Running backs don't really have the lengthiest careers. Look what happened with Todd Gurley. Look what happened with Zeke Elliott recently. it was like they were good for what 3-4 years, something like that, and look where they are now. I mean, Todd Gurley's out of the league. Zeke's free agent. Um, so like offensive linemen, defensive linemen, other positions, they're more durable as well. So that's my other sort of counterpoint to drafting Bijan Robinson. I don't think they would do it if there was the scenario you presented where the Eagles traded back with the Steelers for 17. Okay, then I think it's a little different.
If he's still on the board there, you're saying?
Yeah, if he's still there, okay, fine. I'd be okay with it then. But at 10, even then I don't think they'd do that. But
okay, well then let me ask you this: just while we're on the topic of running backs, what about the idea? I mean, you've talked about it. This is a deep class, and I think there are going to be guys that are going to go in rounds 3, 4 that could be very, very good running backs pretty soon in their career. I mean, that's just the way it goes now in the NFL. Before we had this podcast 2 years ago, I was talking about that when the Steelers drafted Najee Harris. Like I was in the boat of, it's fine. Pick 1 or 2 up in the mid rounds and you'll be good. One of them will hit, or eventually, if you continuously draft running backs in the mid rounds, you're eventually going to hit on one that's going to play well. That's just the way that it works in the NFL in today's day. That's why a guy like Bijan Robinson isn't going second overall the way Saquon Barkley didn't, because it's even different than back in 2018. It's not the same as just 5 years ago. But if the Eagles are sitting there at 30, and let's say they're sitting there and they don't trade out, nobody wants to move back up in the draft, whatever, and Jahmyr Gibbs is still there, who's, kind of been deemed as the second best running back in this class, would you consider that? Or at that point, are you just on the boat of like, pick one up in the 3rd or 4th?
I think I would still be in the boat of pick one up later on. Yeah, they're going to be better players in different positions that I think will be available at 30. I just don't see it as a priority for the Eagles. That's just Howie Roseman never prioritizes running backs like that.
It's perfectly valuable, and I mean, I'm fully in the boat of don't draft running backs in the 1st round. I mean, it's definitely not in the top 15, which is where the Eagles are positioned right now. So we're on the same page, but I just wanted to hear your logic through it. So
yeah.
Would you be disappointed if they took Bijan Robinson, or would you be able to talk yourself into it?
I'd probably be able to talk myself into it eventually. At least if it were to happen, tomorrow night, I'd be sitting there like, oh man, really? Like we could have gone somewhere else. But and then you look at
kind of like the way I was 2 years ago with Najee Harris. You remember that?
Exactly.
My reaction was like, all right, well, like shit. I guess this is the direction they really wanted to go. But then after a week, you're like, all right, well, this is what it is. Like, let's get excited about it.
Yeah,
you're not going to knock the guy before he even plays a snap. So
yeah,
I get that.
What's the highlights? Let's go through all that, and then
no, I get you.
Tell yourself basically.
For the first,
I would talk
24, 48 hours, it's going to suck.
Yeah, I'd be like, man, really? And I'm going to read up all the headlines and all that stuff. But that's. I don't know if it'll come to that. We'll see.
All right, so we got the Bijan Robinson conversation out of the way. We knew that was going to happen, but
yes.
Now let's actually get into some of the prospects you want them to target.
Right,
so go ahead.
This one might be controversial, and I don't think this will happen, but like I sort of alluded to earlier, Jalen Carter potentially as defensive tackle. I know he drafted Jordan Davis last year. And not to say he's not going to pan out, but what's one more defensive lineman, especially when you lost Javon Hargrave. Fletcher Cox isn't getting any younger in the twilight of his career. Then you look at Milton Williams, who's definitely developing. He's gotten a lot better as each year has gone along. But I mean, this guy's a game wrecker. And I like I said, I don't think he'll be there at 10 necessarily. If he slips past Seattle's pick, maybe the Eagles straight up. As I said before, I wouldn't be surprised because, like I said, whenever Howie Roseman has someone on his board who's still available, he really likes, he'll go for him. He'll go after him. So I would say I'd say Jalen Carter is one of them, one of the three I want the Eagles to target.
Well, let me just add, I got it. Like he's another prospect that I had written down here a question about regarding the Eagles. So I mean, I've been very adamant about Jordan Davis needs to develop for the Eagles, but I'm in the same boat with you. I agree. If he's there or within striking distance, like he is a game wrecker. In my opinion, he's the best defensive player in this draft class, if not the best player in this draft class. And it is such an important position, both on the football field and specifically in the Eagles defensive scheme. And if you can add him along with Jordan Davis and Milton Williams and rotate it with Fletcher Cox, like that's going to be a really prominent defensive line compared to what it was last year. But
Yeah.
I don't think that he's getting past Seattle at 5, and I don't see him getting past Detroit at 6. So my golden question for you, you've talked all about how the Eagles have all these picks next year. Howie Roseman loves to trade. If the Cardinals are sitting there at 3 and their phone lines are open to trades, do you put all the chips forward and go up and get him at 3? Because I think that's where it's going to have to be, man. I think that's where you're going to have to go and get it.
I mean, oh, geez, I didn't even think about that scenario, but if Howie Roseman really, like, as of recently, I would say I very much trust the decisions he's made, free agency, draft-wise, all of that. So if he were to go out and do this, I'm like, all right, yeah, fair enough. I mean, you got arguably the best defensive lineman in this draft. You made this defensive line, the Eagles' defensive line, that much scarier, that much better. I give up a lot for it, but I think if he's that, like I said, sort of that game wrecker kind of player, and you sort of not set aside the off the field issues, but you think that won't be a problem with the organization. All right, fine, so be it. Go
buy the jersey. Go buy the jersey. All in on it.
Yeah, just put all the chips in. Go for it. I mean, that would probably mean losing the 30th pick. That's fine. Whatever. I mean, yeah, I never thought about the scenario though.
To me, it just seems like that's the most logical position where if a team wants to trade up and get him, I'm kind of under the assumption I think the Colts are going to go quarterback, and I don't think Jalen Carter's going 1 or 2. No. Then I really just don't see him going past Seattle. And I think the only team that would potentially trade out is the Cardinals in that spot. And I mean, again, that's just my speculation on how I see it. And it would cost a lot. It'd probably cost you 10, might cost you 30 as well. And I mean, to jump from 10 to 3, it might cost you some additional assets on top of that. But it would, if he is that dude and he's becomes one of the top 5 defensive tackles in football, like some people say he's projecting to be, then maybe it is worth it.
Yeah, perhaps. But yeah, I don't know. It'd be I don't know. I definitely feel torn about it if that were to happen. But sort of looking at other prospects.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say one of the top 2 corners potentially, as we were talking about before, maybe Christian Gonzalez or I'm blanking on the other one. Oh, Devin Witherspoon. If they're still on the board, they could potentially look at that. I like Christian Gonzalez. I don't know. It's just the Latino in me. It's just like I want like a Latino on the Eagles. That's part of the reason. But he's also a great player, and I know Devin Witherspoon's sort of above him on many people's boards. But if he's there, then I'd say go for it. I wanted him anyway before, before even like all this re-signing stuff happened with Darius Slay, James Bradbury. I really did want him.
And both of those guys fit so well with to me they're so similar, especially Christian Gonzalez, to kind of like what the Eagles have in like James Bradbury and Darius Slay, and guys who are just man corners. I mean, Christian Gonzalez kind of has ideal size for the position. Devin Witherspoon is also a guy who's not afraid to go and stick his nose in the ground and make a tackle in the run game if you want him to as well. So, I mean, they're just 2 guys that I think are just exactly what you kind of look for in man-to-man NFL corners. And I think that they could fit the Eagles and be something where it's like, hey, they're not expected to come in and be a cornerback number 1 right away either. Where sometimes we see corners struggle a little bit early when they get to the league.
Yeah, exactly. And if anything, this also relates to Avonte Maddox not really being able to stay healthy for all these seasons, but it would certainly I would be okay with that, with one of those 2 coming to Philly. Just add more depth to the position. It's a premier position in the league. So to really add to that back end would be, make it even harder to throw against this team. So
yeah,
especially when you don't have to rush them into it necessarily, when you already have 2 established corners and even 3 with Avonte Maddox. So I would say my third one. I was looking at this earlier, and he wasn't really on my radar for the Eagles, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like Peter Skoronsky potentially coming to Philadelphia. Now he's not exactly the ideal height for an offensive tackle.
Mm-hmm.
So there's talk that potentially he could move in at guard, which would then also kind of boot. I mean, it give Cam Jurgens, last year's second round pick, sort of a competition for that guard spot. And I mean, from the things I've been reading, he only allowed one sack in 860 snaps.
Yeah, dude, and he started all 4 years of college, 33 games, and people make the deal that, like, yeah, he would be a good NFL tackle, he could be an all-pro guard, but like he played all 33 of his starts at left tackle, which is like pretty damn impressive for someone that in the Big Ten, nonetheless, that people feel may have to transition to guard. Where again, it's like you're talking about, he could be really good there.
And the other thing is, Lane Johnson's getting up there in age. Jordan Mailata had sort of a down year last year, but it would be similar to the Andre Dillard situation, where he wasn't exactly thrown in right away because we already had, I think at that point we had Jason Peters at left tackle before he left, and then Lane Johnson obviously still manning that right side. So it could be sort of similar in that sense that he maybe doesn't have to play right away, but it just gives the Eagles another piece, even just as depth, just to have as a backup for maybe a year, and then whenever Lane Johnson decides to hang it up, you just plug him right in.
Or even Jason Kelce at that point, if Kelce decides to call it quits, and then you have your center of the future, Cam Jurgens, just ready to go, and you have him trained to and ready to play center. You don't have to move him back over from guard, or even then, if Jurgens wins the battle for guard, and Skoronski's just a great backup offensive lineman, then all of a sudden you've got him ready to take over on that offensive line as well. So I think your logic makes a ton of sense, dude. I mean, is that kind of what you'd have in mind? Is like, hey, he's there to be competition for guard, or he's there like, hey, if Mailata continues to struggle, or is it kind of all this just going all together? It would make sense.
It's kind of all together. I think it makes sense. So, I mean, I think it's a win all around. If you draft him, especially if he's arguably the best tackle in the class, one of those top four. I think. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked because it's a sort of a best player available scenario. Like, if I'm being really honest with you, I don't know what in the world the Eagles are going to do. I've never been less sure about what they were going to do, what position they were going to target.
Yeah.
But knowing the history of Howie Roseman, and there's building in the trenches, that at some point in this draft, whether it's the first round or not, the offensive line will be addressed. And I mean, why wouldn't you? He's kind of a pretty appealing prospect, if you ask me. But
I think it makes a ton of sense for the Eagles with everything that you've outlined. If you would have asked me about any of the other three top offensive tackle prospects, I would have said, I don't know if it makes a ton of sense, just given that how win now mode this team is, given that they already have two, really good offensive tackles, one of them the best right tackle in the league. But the fact that this guy can play guard, or can, a lot of people think he can be an all-pro guard, and he can also provide depth, or if Jordan Mailata struggles, I think it makes a ton of sense.
Jeff Stoutland's one of the best offensive line coaches. He will coach him.
He'll be able to make the move to guard.
Yeah, absolutely. He would make it as smooth as possible. He's done it before with players, so I wouldn't be worried about that transition necessarily. So those are my three, I would say.
So can I run two or three other names by you before we transition over to the Steelers? All right. So you've talked about how defensive line is a priority. I'm going to run by two other defensive linemen for you. One of them, and this first one, I guess I'll say, is more of a, he's gonna be more of a defensive tackle, and he's gonna be kind of, playing more of like a 2 to 3 tech type guy, a little smaller. Kalijah Kancey, What do you think of him in that spot potentially? Is it too early for him, or do you think that that's somebody that they could potentially go after?
There's buzz that he's moving up on scouts draft boards, GM's draft boards. So
I don't know if he gets out of the top 15, if I'm being honest.
really, okay. Huh. See, I wouldn't have thought this. Man, I'm not opposed to it either. It's like another defensive lineman. Defensive tackle, yes, definitely another piece there. Not exactly as good as Jalen Carter, but that's kind of a tough ask for any prospect, really. But that would be really fascinating. I would be okay with that. I would actually, yeah, I think I'd be very much okay with that. I mean, people compare him to Aaron Donald, whatever, because of size. He's only 6 feet, whatever. No, the measurables were fairly similar. I'm not going to say he's going to pan out to be that way, but
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be okay with that. I'd be cool with that. Yeah.
So the other one, also another defensive lineman, more of that kind of edge rusher,
Yeah.
guy that would play more on like kind of the outside D end, more in like that Josh Sweat, Derek Barnett role that we've talked about. What about Lucas Van Ness? What do you think of that as a potential fit, or is it too early for him?
Man, so I was looking at this earlier, just based off. I mean, NFL.com has him as the 14th ranked prospect. ESPN has him at 15. PFF has him at 27. He can play across the defensive line. Pretty good bull rush. Chop and rip move. I mean, his motor is also really high, I'd say. And again, it's not like you have to ask him to like start right away because you have Josh Sweat, you have Derek Barnett, you have Hassan Reddick.
And it is the fact, it is kind of what I talked about at the top of the show. Like, you can rotate him a little bit, and the best teams do rotate their edge rushers. And I mean, like, I want to get your honest opinion on it, but my mindset with someone like that, it could be Miles. I think it's too early for Miles Murphy, in my opinion, but someone along those lines. But the thing with him also in drafting that position is it's like, if I'm correct, I think Josh Sweat's a free agent after this season, and Brandon Graham is also getting up there in age.
Yeah.
So I feel like it wouldn't hurt for that to be a position to target at the very least.
No, yeah, it's. I wouldn't be shocked if they went defensive end, whether it's him or it's even Nolan Smith, to be honest. So who's kind of more similar to Hassan Reddick, more sort of that outside linebacker kind of position, but
definitely because of his size too. But I get what you're saying
that's a big part of it too. But Van Ness, I think, would make sense, especially when Brandon Graham's up there in age. He's going to be a free agent after this year. Derek Barnett, same deal, and he's coming off an ACL tear. Josh Sweat, I believe I can't remember. He might be a free agent after this year. But
I just feel like that was what I remember hearing, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I thought he signed an extension that it kept him through the next 2 seasons, but that's for another. But it certainly wouldn't hurt to add another piece, especially if you don't have to play him right away. It's more of a future. And if he's a rotational guy, so be it. Like that's just the luxury of having so many pass rushers that I feel like the Eagles have always, and Howie Roseman has always been prioritizing. So again, I'd be fine with that pick as well.
All right, sounds good. So I think this hit on pretty much anything questions I had for this pick. We'll talk a little bit about the pick at 30 a little later, but let's dive into this series. Let me write down one more thing real quick because I just had something come up for pick 30, but don't want to forget about it. But I'm going to ask you that. Let's talk about the Steelers a little bit and what they could potentially do at 17. So, I mean, to me, the two guys that I definitely have my eye on when it comes to an offensive tackle, and it may be almost a little unconventional because it's the opposite of what the boards and mock drafts have necessarily been saying. The two guys I really like are Darnell Wright and Broderick Jones. I mean, not necessarily in that order, but those are the two guys that I think fit what the Steelers need. Look, Paris Johnson Jr., I've heard rumblings that the Steelers really like him, that he may be the guy that they would try to move up and get. I think he's the best pure pass protector in this tackle class, but he doesn't blow me away, and especially because the Steelers are getting back more towards that ground and pound football. I don't know if he necessarily fits as well compared to a guy like Broderick Jones, who's, got a lot of good technique, but still hasn't played a ton of football games. He fits what Pat Myers likes. Pat Meyer, the offensive line coach, likes in a tackle. So I think he makes sense. And then I also really like Darnell Wright because he's a big guy. The Steelers love big offensive tackles. He's played, people make this big deal. Oh, he's a right tackle. Well, yeah, he played his final season at Tennessee at right tackle, but he started 27 games at left in his college career. Like, he can play both, and I think the Steelers may value that versatility. Like, whichever side they like deem him better as, they have another option in Dan Moore Jr. or Chuk Okorafor. So those are the two guys that if you got to trade up and get them, if those are the guys you're targeting, go get them. If you can wait till 17 and Darnell Wright or Broderick Jones is still going to be on the board there, then fantastic. That's great. But those are my 1-2 on the big board in no particular order. They're just about even the two guys I want.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more realistic Darnell Wright's still there. Actually, here's the thing. What we were talking about earlier, the run on offensive tackles could very much happen.
Yeah.
Especially if it's the Bears and then it's the Eagles, and so that the Steelers might have to trade up in that regard if they really want one of the top 4 offensive linemen. But I do like that. Versatility is a big thing, a big part of. I mean, that's just a benefit to whoever drafts him. If he can play both positions, he's played there, left and right. Like that's huge. So I think that makes sense. If one of those two is definitely there, and it's a huge need, as you said, to protect Kenny Pickett. So
100%. So I mean, outside of those two guys, I mean, let's say worst case scenario, both of those guys are off the board. The Steelers weren't able to work a trade. I mean, I've talked about the other positions I see them needing to address. Look, when it comes to the interior defensive line, I think it's a reach to go after someone like Brian Brzee, and I think Kalijah Cansey will be off the board. I like him. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's there, and I do also think Cansey fits better in a 4-3 scheme. Steelers obviously run more of a typical 3-4.
Yeah,
and it's like all right. So that's kind of out of the question. Then it leaves, in my opinion, corner or that third edge rusher that the Steelers really haven't had to complement a guy to complement TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith in the time that they've been there. So some of the other guys I like here, there's 3 other ones. I'll get into them real quick. So the one guy I like, and if they decide to go cornerback here, because I'm assuming also like Devin Witherspoon, Christian Gonzalez, they're off the board. I don't see them falling that far. But I really do like Deonte Banks here. I think Deonte Banks brings some of that man coverage. I think he brings some of that size that you covet in a corner as well. I think he would fit Pittsburgh. Supposedly Mike Tomlin likes him. And it's not even so much of, him just being an aggressive player and being able to tackle in the run game and, still having that 4-4 speed. But it's also like, I'm just not crazy about any other potential corner here. I think that if you were to take a guy like Emmanuel Forbes, you're reaching a little bit. If you were to, take a DJ Turner's a guy I really like, but I think he's late first, early second, like you're reaching here. And then the question becomes like Joey Porter. And I gotta say, man, I think a team's going to fall in love with Joey Porter. I think they're going to fall in love with him having, the longest arms of any corner, the longest wingspan of any corner, having a big, 6 foot plus 200 pound or 190 frame, whatever he weighs. But like, dude, he scares me as being a bust so bad. And it's just the fact like this guy was super, and everybody talks about it. He was super handsy in college. He relies on his hands heavily at the line of scrimmage. And he downfield, he's going to draw a lot of penalties that in college aren't pass interference, but they'll get called at the NFL level. And he runs, I think I have it written down here. I think he ran like, let me find out. I got to find out for sure what he ran for his 40 time here because I don't want to be mistaken. But he just doesn't have that recovery speed that you'd want in somebody who already relies too much on his arms and contact. He ran a 4.46 40. I mean, it's just not fast enough at the position when he doesn't have some of these other traits. So he scares me for his bust potential. Deonte Banks would be the corner I'd want them to target here if that's the direction they want to go.
Right. Okay. So there goes my question about Joey Porter Jr. I was literally going to ask. I remember you saying at some point, I think when we were on campus, like about him, and I think you said you didn't want him, and that the Commanders potentially could be targeting him. We don't know, but
yeah, I hope so. I mean, I I don't know for sure. The only source that I've really heard that the Commanders are all in on Joey Porter is our friend Brian Ramos, which I don't know if he's got some in with the Commanders or something.
Yeah.
Not the most reliable guy to take information from. So
yeah, I'll ask. I don't know if this has any. Joey Porter, didn't he play for the Steelers?
Yes, he did. He did play for the Steelers.
Senior.
Joey Porter Jr. grew up rooting for the Steelers. Obviously, Penn State is right there compared to Pittsburgh. He said how he would love to play with his hometown team. Man, it's a great story, but it's just like the Steelers can't afford to miss on this first-round pick on a corner. It can't happen that way, dude. They don't draft corners well enough to take one in the first when they've got so many other needs and have it miss. So that's my concern with it. Dude, I honestly don't even know if Joey Porter Jr. is a first-round pick, in my opinion. Like I said, I think someone will fall in love with the size and the wingspan and say, hey, he may not have the best closing speed, but if we coach up, the intangibles and coach up his ability to be a pure bump and run corner, then yeah, maybe someone will fall in love with everything else and they'll take him in the first round. But in my opinion, I think he's more of a second-round corner.
Okay, that's fair. But if you were a GM sitting there, would you? No, I don't think you would. But if you knew all the background, if you knew all the backgrounds, if you knew this, dad played with the Steelers, do you think that would play into your mind at all? Is that even a factor? Do you even think about that?
I think especially an organization like the Steelers, it's interesting because it's Omar Khan who's like, it's his first year doing it. Yeah. And I'm sure he doesn't want to have a bust in his first round pick as GM.
Yeah.
But like, I think an organization like the Steelers, it may creep into your mind a little bit, but like at the end of the day, like if you let that make your decision, like that's how you lose a job, that's how you get fired. But like, it's a nice story. And they did just last year draft Kenny Pickett, who played in the same building. And, that was the whole nostalgic story that, he practiced in the same facility and Mike Tomlin always had his eye on him, throughout the whole process and watching him come up through the years at Pitt. But like, man, like the Steelers, like, I'm cool with that. If you're between two guys and there's the storyline there, fine, take him, but not when the other guy, in my opinion, is clearly a better talent.
Okay. Yeah, that's totally fair. So who's your last prospect, unless you already touched on all of them?
No, I mean, the one other guy, and again, this comes down to like just the positions that they target here. I think then the next position that they kind of lock into is that edge rusher. And I think at this spot, the three guys that could potentially be there would be Lucas Van Ness, Will McDonald IV, and the guy that I think fits the Steelers the most, Nolan Smith. I really like Nolan Smith. I like the athletic ability. I think especially in today's day and age where, the quarterbacks are so mobile. In the AFC North, you've got Lamar Jackson. Joe Burrow's got some speed to him. Obviously, Deshaun Watson. And you've also got these teams that want to run it in the division too with, Nick Chubb or J.K. Dobbins or Joe Mixon. The possibility of the RPO is always there. Like a guy who's as athletic as Nolan Smith, even if he's got to build up in size a little bit, like he's a guy that I think could definitely fit the Steelers mold of like, hey, bring him in, rotate him in. Like we don't need him to be, getting double-digit sacks for us, but be just an athletic rotational piece that can do it in the run game. And I think he fits that a lot. There was another note that I wrote down here. I want to get it. There was I think there was something like he actually put on, like he came into college. He weighs 240 now, but I feel like maybe I'm thinking of someone else. I thought it was him that he came into college undersized and he like ended up putting on like 20 pounds of weight over his like time at Georgia. But I might be thinking of another prospect. But again, if you can build up his size a little bit, get him up in size and frame, that's all right. And even if you can't, the fact that he would be playing more of that prototypical outside linebacker, I think it's all right. And his athletic ability will make up for the lack of size a little bit. And people are worried if he puts on weight, his 40 time is going to go down. Like, how much is it possibly going to go down? This guy ran, what is it here? Oh man, I just had his notes in front of me. He ran a 4.3940. All right, God forbid he puts on 20 pounds of weight. His 4.340 is going to go to a 4.42. Like it's not going to affect him that much in the grand scheme of things. And I like the athletic ability, so he's the other guy that I like them potentially targeting there if they decide to go the edge rusher direction.
Yeah, I was going to say Nolan Smith. I was going to ask you, would you see the Steelers drafting him if if the other two positions weren't, or those other two players or players they don't like are not there. But you pretty much answered that. Now, do you see them? I mean, I don't know if this is too early, but Miles Murphy is. I don't know. Is he someone who's on your radar, sort of deal?
It's interesting. I mean, again, if the organization loves him, that's fine. Me personally, I like the other three guys I talked about in Will McDonald and Nolan Smith and Lucas Van Ness. I mean, Van Ness, I feel like he's going to be a bit of a tweener in the Steelers system, but I really like those three guys more than I like Miles Murphy in that sense. So, that's just my opinion. But hey, if Miles Murphy, if all the tackles are off the board, they're not crazy about a corner, they want to address edge rusher, and they decide like, hey, yeah, like Miles Murphy's the guy, like I'll get behind him.
Okay.
Kind of the same mindset you had about Kalijah Cansey.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, that's.
So, I think that's pretty much everything I have at 17. I don't see them really trading back here. I don't really see anybody wanting to trade up to 17 for anything. I mean, it's unless you have like a position of need that's going to be like if you're like targeting a wide receiver and you want to go and get like Zay Flowers or Jackson Smith and Jigba before like the Chargers come up at 21 or something like that, like maybe that's where you move up. But like, I don't see it as a position. Like, you're not trading up for a premier interior defensive tackle here. Like, you're not trading up for O-line. They're all going to be off the board here. So like, it's one of those spots where it's like, unless the Steelers move up, I don't see them trading back. But like I said, I think we're going to be sitting here on our next episode talking about the Steelers' first-round pick being whatever offensive tackle they liked the most, and Omar Khan went and did whatever it took to get him. I genuinely feel that way. So
I kind of expect that too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I sit right now at 17. So let's see what else we have here to go over. I mean, I think the next thing, let's talk about these other first-round picks that the Eagles and Steelers have. We don't have to spend as much time on them, and maybe we could talk just about some other, maybe mid-round prospects we like or have in mind briefly. And then we'll get into some of the other news. But let's talk about 30. What do you have in mind here at 30 per se? I'm curious what prospects you may be eyeing up here at the end of the first.
Yeah, so this is a lot tougher. I sort of came into this with the idea that the Eagles would probably trade out of this if someone wants, I don't know, a prospect they really like, they trade back in. But
which is valid. I mean, like you said, I feel like you've talked. That's a very real possibility.
I think it will happen. They're just not going to stay put where they are, especially if. I mean, me personally, I'm not like. I don't really know who they would go after if they don't get a corner. Maybe Brian Branch is. I mean, he's versatile. I mean, so we would have the versatility. Played safety. I mean, played more of a slot corner position at Alabama. So potentially, but that might be a little bit of a reach.
I like Branch a lot. I think this is the range where he's going to start to go of like anywhere from like 28 to like 40. Like that's going to be where he's probably going to go. 40 may be even a little late. I mean, he may be gone by 35, in that case.
Yeah, so if you really want to address the secondary, then I would go with him. But if you don't address offensive line, there are players like Steve Avila, I mean, TCU. I feel like they're Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin. I feel like those are players that are you probably trade back for those players. I don't think the value is quite there. It might be a little early if you draft them at 30. It's more of, I think, early second round pick. I mean, I don't know.
I think you could say the same thing about like Osiris Torrance even. Like there was first round buzz on him, but like it's more like if you trade back somewhere in like the 40s of the second round, that's more where he would be.
Yeah. And so potentially addressing the interior of the offensive line. That would make sense. And then, I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs is a really, like, I know I said, like, this is definitely a possibility too, I think. Even though I just said, like, 20 minutes ago that the Eagles wouldn't address it in the first round. I don't know. I don't think they're going to do it. I really don't. And I don't want him to. But if he's still there, maybe. I mean, it's kind of that, like he's in that range of that late first round potentially and early second or early to mid second round. I mean, again, I think this is more of a a trade down sort of thing. But I don't know if you
Let,
really
let me
like.
let me
Yeah,
throw a couple names at you. I mean, defensive tackle is like interesting, interior defensive line, but like what about a guy like Brian Brzee from Clemson or a guy like Mozzie Smith from Michigan? I mean, both guys who are more of your typical like, nose in the ground, like they're lining up at like the 0-1 tech, like the run stuffers. Maybe that would almost be a better fit alongside Jordan Davis, who Jordan Davis, I mean, again, a guy who is kind of going to do the same thing, but you would really all of a sudden fortify yourself in that the run stuffing game. All of a sudden, if you had someone alongside him.
yeah. I mean, potentially that could be an option. I'm not too I'm not too into those two names. I mean, they're not like bad prospects by any means. I just if you're getting someone sort of similar to Jordan Davis in the sense of run stuffing, they're sort of better in that aspect. I don't know. I feel like you need someone to complement that more as a pass rusher, if that makes sense.
Which Cansey does. I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I would have them two on my radar, but I mean, you never know with any of this. You never know the thinking that goes on in front offices and things like that. So,
all right. Well,
yeah.
one other name I want, or I guess name or position I want to throw out at you here. If they decide to go, in some other direction other than corner at 10, and they, decide, all right, we do want to fortify the secondary. You brought up Brian Branch. I mean, there are some corners that could be potential, like here at the back end of round 1. I mean, Emmanuel Forbes is an undersized corner, but he's a ball hawk, 14 career interceptions, 6 of them for pick sixes. DJ Turner, I think, is a name really flying under the radar. Keely Ringo, a guy who's a corner, blazing speed, but loves to be physical. People have talked about him potentially moving to safety. I mean, these are all names at the back end of the first round. Do any of them entice you at all?
I don't know if Forbes. I feel like he's going to go higher than before 30 at least.
Yeah.
Some teams definitely going to fall in love with him, even if he is not exactly the he's not really, doesn't have that build necessarily, but those three names. I mean, they're definitely. I mean, if they're still there, the Eagles would probably look at them if they haven't addressed corner already for sure. But I mean, I kind of am sort of. I don't know, like. I'm still like 30 for me is just the pick that I really, really don't know what they're going to do with it. I don't like, but I still have that gut feeling that they're going to trade out of it. I really don't think they're going to trade up unless there's someone they really, really like, which I still just don't see happening with the amount of picks they have this year. So I don't know. It's really tough for me. It really depends on what they do with the first pick at 10. So I'm not super convinced by that pick at number 30 being the pick they actually end up making. It'll probably be a different one. I don't know why. I just am so adamant that it's not going to happen, that they're not going to use the 30th pick. They're going to trade it away.
It's valid. I mean, that's how I feel about 17. Like I'm like so locked in on the idea that the Steelers are doing whatever it takes to get a tackle. Like no matter. And if you feel like, hey, they're moving back, then that's perfectly valid. I mean, speaking of moving back, that's what I don't know if there's any names you want to bring up. I was just going to kind of move on to 32 real quick. But 32, I mean, I know that they've talked about moving back, and I think it's like a more likely scenario they do that if they have to move up at 17 and they want to recoup some of their draft capital by moving back, grabbing a couple other mid-round picks. If they are picking here at 32, and I'm under the assumption that they already went tackle, then this is definitely like the range where I see them adding the guys that I just brought up for the Eagles, Mozzie Smith and Brian Brzee. Those are guys that I see kind of fitting what the Steelers need in their interior defensive line. I also think corner is fully. I've talked to. I love DJ Turner. His speed combined with his ability and instincts to stick with guys in man coverage, I think he's really going to shine at the next level. I mean, granted, the Steelers really didn't pay a lot of attention to him in the pre-draft process, so I doubt it's going to happen. And again, he's not the most physical corner when it comes to getting involved in making tackles and getting downhill in the run game. So I doubt it's going to happen, but I really do like what he brings to the table. Right. But I could see them going with a guy like Keely Ringo here. I think he fits a lot of what the Steelers want to do. He's fast and he loves to be physical. you know what? Like, yeah, you may have to like work with him in technique a little bit, and down the road that may have to transition to safety. Fine, that's all well and good. I think that you could get a lot of good years out of a guy like Keely Ringo here. And yeah, and then those other two defensive tackles I brought up. I think that's kind of the range of or the prospects the Steelers would be looking at here. There's not a lot of edge rushers I necessarily love at this pick. I mean, I'm just going through my notes of some of the guys I wrote down. I mean, maybe a guy like Will McDonald would still be available here. Felix Anadike Uzama might still be available here, even though it might be a little bit early for him. So it's an interesting spot. I mean, I feel like experts I've talked about have kind of said, like, unless there's a specific position where, like, there's a guy that you're just, like, in love with here, there's a little bit of no man's land from, like, 28 to, like, 35 of, like, you're either going to be reaching for a guy or it's going to be someone, like, you're not crazy about. There is, like, a little bit of a lull here with these 8 to 10 picks. So it's an interesting spot that both our teams are going to have to pick here, potentially. But
yeah, so I mean, you sort of talked about it. Do you think the Steelers would trade this one back, like trade back with someone else?
It seems like they want to, dude. I mean, if they are able to get the tackle at 17, I don't know if it's really as much of an importance for them. But if they have to trade up at 17, I definitely see them wanting to trade back and get some more mid-round picks because they do have a lot of positions to draft. I mean, I think another thing, you know, it's a little bit of a reach for both of these teams, but could Trenton Simpson be someone these teams target at inside linebacker and off-ball linebacker? You know, I don't know. Again, it feels like maybe a little bit of a reach, but again, it's almost that point where if there's no, like, if there's not really a lot of talent here, then maybe you just draft for need if you're forced to draft here. So, kind of the mindset in this spot. And I really like Brian Branch here as well, if he's still available.
Yeah. I was going to say he might be a potential target for the Steelers if
they
don't address corner.
Grabbing that versatile corner that they lost in Cam Sutton, the corner safety, that guy who can play all over in the secondary.
Yeah.
So that's kind of everything there. I mean, I guess before we move on, is there any mid-round pick that you're like, this is a guy that no one's talking about that I have my eye on?
There's the tight end out of South Dakota State who I'm blanking on, who I was just reading up on. It was like one of those picks that the Eagles could potentially make it.
Let me see if I can find this real quick. Because now that you bring it up, I mean, one person that I kind of have a little crush on is Darnell Washington.
Yeah.
But
he's interesting too.
Oh, you're talking about Tucker Kraft.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's his, I couldn't remember his name, but yes. Man, that would be like to add. I mean, I think the Eagles will address tight end at some point in this draft, especially with not really having the most consistent number 2 and 3 options. Grant Calcaterra, as I've said before, more of a pass catcher, and then Jack Stoll more of a blocking tight end. I feel like again, I blanked on his name. Is a bit of both. A bit better, a bit more balanced. So that's, I mean, potentially someone the Eagles could look into. But other than him, I would say, I think he's probably my number one crush, as you put it.
I mean, one guy that I kind of have my eye on if they like wait a little longer. I guess I'll give you 2. One guy I have my eye on if they wait a little later to address the interior defensive line. And again, I say wait a little later, but he's definitely going to be at least a second-round pick. And excuse me if I butcher the name, Adetomiwa Adedemboor, I believe is how you say it. You know who I'm talking about. Yeah, the D tackle. I believe he's out of Northwestern.
Yep.
But he's a guy that I think is another person that I like him a lot. I like a lot of what he brings, but I'm worried that he's not quite big enough for what the Steelers need on the interior right now. But a guy that I think is going to be very good. Maybe he fits better in a 4-3, but someone I like a lot. And then if the Steelers, this is what I'm talking about here. When I'm talking about the Steelers waiting until maybe their second round pick or waiting till their 3rd round pick, a corner that I think would definitely be a good pickup at that point is Julius Brents. I really like Julius Brents when it comes to him potentially being a later round pick. And again, I think he could go in the 3rd.
Yeah.
But I think like if he's even there at the end of the 2nd, that's someone that they consider. So, he's got a lot of intangibles. I'm trying to double check real quick what his 40 time was because I know he was also a Blazer. And I should have it here. Yeah, right here I've got it. He ran a for some reason I can't find his 40, but he's a guy that I liked, and again, another guy that I know had length. But other
Yeah.
than that, I think that there's other corners that are going to go later that they could potentially target. But yeah, I don't know. There's definitely some picks they could go after, but I think we've given a pretty good breakdown of what to expect from these two teams.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when we talk about the strength of his class, it's tight end, offensive tackle, corner. I mean, some might argue receiver is sort of like, like it's fairly solid. Not that our teams really need that.
Yeah.
I don't even think Zay Flat. No, I don't think he'll still be there at 30. I've seen him mock the Eagles at 30, but
Dude, if he's there at 32, Steelers should grab him. He's my favorite wide receiver by far. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that would be something if one of our two teams drafted him. If he was somehow still there, which I don't think he will, but
He's the type of guy where it's like, all right, like your team probably should have gone in a different direction, but man, when he gets on the field, like holy cow, are you going to get excited about him?
yeah, no, exactly. So I mean,
Yeah.
I think he'll go earlier, but if he's still there, I mean, I hope it's the Eagles who grab him though. But I
So
don't
we
think
will
so.
see how it all unfolds, and we'll obviously break it down. But we've got some other news related to these two teams that we have to get to. So let's start with the big stuff. Jalen Hurts, something
Yeah,
that we all expected. It finally happened. He is back with the Eagles, re-signing a long-term extension.
5 years, 255 million, 179.3 million guaranteed. This is 51 million per year. Um, Deal completed by Nicole Lynn, Hertz's agent, who actually just announced she was pregnant, which is also something that it just came out today. I don't know. That was kind of cool, but I might have misread. I think it was her, but a no trade clause, the first in the Eagles history. Um, that I wasn't expecting the no trade clause at least, but when you look at the numbers, it's actually the first 2 years fairly cap friendly. This coming year, Hertz is going to make, or at least salary wise, 6.15 million. Next year, next season, 13.56 million, and then it increases quite a bit in 2025 and 2026. But Howie Roseman's a salary cap guru. He's an expert in that and really knows how to restructure deals and all that stuff to make it work. But this deal was, yeah, as you said, we all expected it. When I first saw it, I remember being in like an LT in one of our buildings, and man, I got out of a meeting. I walk into the Center for Sports Communication, and I hear like Jimmy, one of our friends. He's like, "Dude, did you just see the deal?" I'm like, "What?" And I'm like, and he's like, "Yeah, Jalen Hurts." I'm like, "No way!" Like he actually got paid. I'm like, "Oh." And I was just sitting there, like taking it all in, like, "Wow, this really just happened." But he absolutely deserves it. I mean, the entire league sort of lauded it. I mean, it's the appraisal. I mean, the fact that the Eagles got this done first out of the other quarterbacks who are going to get extensions, likes of Lamar Jackson with or without the Ravens, Joe Burrow from the Bengals, Chargers, Justin Herbert. It's. I'm really glad that they got it done, but that it also makes him the highest paid player in the league because we saw in the Super Bowl he went toe to toe with Patrick Mahomes and played better than him. And if it weren't for the stupid rule of like usually it's the winning team's player that wins the Super Bowl MVP, it would have been Jalen Hurts winning it because he literally did everything in that game. And I mean, I love everything about him, his work ethic. Like I've said this so many times, I feel like I'm just a broken record at this point. But he said in one of the press conferences recently, one of my favorite quotes he's had. Money's nice, but championships are better. I'm like, oh man, I absolutely love that. Like that's just how he is. That's his work ethic. That's his mentality. Um, and I'm really happy that they got it done. I'm really happy for him. That now he's getting paid like he should. And people are saying like, "Oh, do you think it's going to work out like Carson Wentz? Like, you think he's going to fall off?" No, I absolutely don't think that because they're two very different people, very different characteristic, different mindsets. Wentz was more of he wasn't the most coachable guy. Jalen Hurts is very much that, and he wants to be pushed. And he puts in the hours himself, even in the off. When it's not in the facility, he puts so much. He just loves the game. It's like so much. He just has the drive to get better. And just everything about him, I just love so much. Everything you would want in a franchise quarterback. So, I absolutely love this. And it's very much deserved.
And it's the fact too, where it's like, that things are going to get bloated in years to come when I know Joe Burrow just got his 5th-year option picked up. Like when they talk about contract extensions next offseason, like it's going to be bonanzas. Like the Eagles are going to look good in like 2-3 years that this is the number that they got Jalen Hurts at.
Yes.
Like compared to what some of these future quarterbacks are going to get. And it's going to start with Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. And eventually we presume that that Lamar Jackson, something's going to happen with him at some point here. That domino is going to fall. So I agree with you that at the end of the day, like the fact that like they're getting it done now. It's done. His contract's on the books. Like you're set at the quarterback position. He's the guy. Like good that it got done, and like you don't have to wait and worry about it going forward.
Yeah, no Lamar Jackson situation, thankfully. It's all sorted out and we're good. So happy for it.
Absolutely. And in some more minor news, we'll touch on it real quick. But the Steelers also like made some moves, though. A reason that I really didn't talk about wide receiver as a need at all is because they went out and they traded for Allen Robinson. They basically swapped second-round picks with the Rams and took on about $5 million of his salary. So the Steelers, bring in a guy who's, he's going to provide some depth at outside linebacker. He's played a ton of slot throughout his career, and you're also adding a nice veteran to the room where the oldest player prior to this was Deontay Johnson. So I think this move checks a lot of boxes. Yes, he hasn't looked like his normal self the past really 2 seasons, but I think there's a lot of different stuff you can attribute that to. 2 years ago, who was he with 2 years ago? Was it the Bears still? Or was it the Jag? It was the Bears.
It was the Bears. It was the Bears.
Years ago. So that was Justin Fields' rookie year. And then last year, he was with Matthew Stafford, who was banged up basically all year. So I think there's a lot of reasons that go into it. But at the end of the day, you also have to consider the Rams brought, and I think it was Mike DeFabo was the guy who said this quote. The Rams brought in Allen Robinson to be the number 2 wide receiver to Cooper Kupp. The Steelers are bringing in Allen Robinson to compete with Gunnar Olszewski and Calvin Austin. There's a clear difference here in what's expected. So even if he has a bust season, if he plays like last year, if he has 30 catches for 200 yards and doesn't get a TD, like it does not matter. You literally just ate $5 million to give it a shot. And at the end of the day, I'm sure that $5 million is probably going to be worth it because I'm sure he's going to pass on some valuable piece of advice or information to the younger wide receivers in that room. So I love the move. Nothing to complain about here. I still think that the Steelers are going to add a wide receiver. I don't think they're going to draft one, but I think that they are definitely going to look to at least bring some in as undrafted free agents after the draft period is over. They also re-signed Miles Boykin, which I liked a lot because he's a special teams ace as a gunner. And the Steelers lost some valuable pieces from their special teams. Benny Snell did not come back. Marcus Allen did not come back, who was a special teams master for them. So they bring back one of their key special teamers from last year. They also bring in Tanner Muse, who was an inside linebacker. I think that was in a previous episode. We may have talked about that, but he's been a long-time special teamer. Derek Watt was another guy they lost who was a good special teamer. So I like this move, bringing back a good special teamer. And he's a guy that when push comes to shove, if you have to get him in there to, play some receiver, you know what? He is a depth piece at that spot. So I like the move bringing him back. I like the move going out and getting Allen Robinson. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to it, but to me, it's 2 good moves by the Steelers.
Well, one, I just want to say the $5 million for Allen Robinson is, the Rams are eating $10 million of it on that salary. Yeah. So that's a win for the Steelers. And I guess I'll add another thing onto the receiver news. The Eagles actually signed Olamide Zaccheaus for a 1-year deal.
That was someone I remember. That was someone on our pre-free agency episode that I said would be a fit for the Steelers. But yeah, he gets signed by the Eagles. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so he's still only 25 years old. Played with the Falcons, 40 receptions, 533 yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, it's more of a slot receiver, which is what we need. Which is also why I'm not entirely sold on the Eagles drafting a receiver. They might still in the first round. I don't know. Maybe with 30. Who knows? But I think it gives Quez Watkins, who really underwhelmed last season. It gives him competition, and I think Zaccheaus is probably also sort of a replacement for Zach Pascal, who went to the Cardinals following Jonathan Gannon. I don't know if he really did that for that reason, but yeah. So it's still a good depth signing for the Eagles. But yeah, that's all I have to add on the receiver front.
All right, man. This is a great time, dude.
Yeah,
This is such a fun time of the year, dude. You can't beat it. And hey, we'll be watching together on Thursday when these draft picks come in. Hopefully we both come into our next episode loving what these two teams did in the first round and really through all 7. But I'm sure there will be plenty to break down between the two. So until that next episode, everybody go out there, enjoy the draft, enjoy your team's picking, enjoy the Steelers and Eagles, potentially getting all these players we've outlined to go and bring in and be a part of this franchise. And we will break all of it down on our next episode. See you next time. Bye-bye.